And I wanted to make sure that the present generation doesn't forget the debt that we owe that generation. Because make no mistake, we couldn't wear the clothes we choose to wear, listen to the music we choose to listen to, practice the religions we want, have the political opinions that we want, if it weren't for that generation. And we should never forget what they did for us. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the books. Crucible of Fate is a part dramatised and part fictionalised story about D-Day, the 6th of June, which were the Normandy landings. That's what they're also known as. A quick history lesson without getting into too much detail. At the start of the war in 1939-1940, things went really badly. The British Army, the French Army were comprehensively defeated in mainland Europe. France surrendered. The British Army was evacuated from Dunkirk and came back to the United Kingdom. In the extremities of empire, so in North Africa and Burma and places like that, we continued to fight, but we were losing battle after battle until about mid-1941, even as late as 1942. And then in 1942, the tide started to turn slightly. But we always knew that no matter how well we fought in North Africa or in Burma or in Italy, we would never comprehensively defeat Nazi Germany to the point where it was unconditional defeat for them, an absolutely, you know, perfect victory for us, unless we could land a force on mainland Europe and destroy the core German army in mainland Europe. And so D-Day was inevitable. It had to happen if we wanted to win the war. Now, people were really shaky about doing this because moving a force by sea is difficult enough anyway. Getting it to land on an enemy-held shoreline that's been fortified and pre-prepared for defence is a different matter, especially when a couple of years behind this, in August 1942, a large-scale commando raid at Dieppe, which is just off the right of the slide there, went disastrously wrong. And over 1,500 Canadian soldiers were massacred on the beach, another 1,500 taken prisoner, all the tanks destroyed. It was a really, really bad do. That wasn't an invasion, it was just a large-scale commando raid, but it hadn't been thought out. Although it was never planned as a reconnaissance for this, it was used as a lessons learned activity. They realised that they needed overwhelming naval and air support, that they needed to get specialist tanks to break through the defences. They needed to pick the right beaches so the tanks wouldn't get ground into the gravel. And all kinds of lessons, not least of all the need for a massive deception plan. And so in early 1943, General Harold Morgan, a fairly minor general in the British Army, was told to start planning this with a very small staff in a poky little office in London. And he sent out an appeal for holiday photographs. Anyone who's been anywhere on the coast in Europe, from Norway all the way to Spain, send me your holiday snaps. And that's where he started from, with tourist maps and little AA road maps. And from there, they gradually narrowed the beaches down to the point where, a couple of weeks before D-Day, commandos were coming out of submarines, swinging ashore onto the sand, getting little capsules full of sand, swimming back out to the submarine and coming back to UK to test the consistency of the sand. And behind all that, there was a massive deception plan. General Montgomery, who you'll hear about in a minute, was given a body double who was floating about in the Mediterranean when Montgomery was actually in England preparing for the invasion. Every single German agent in Britain was caught and turned to work for British intelligence. And they started to feed German intelligence a complete load of nonsense. They built dummy armies in Scotland, in southeast England, so the Germans really didn't know where we were going to land. Would it be Norway? Would it be Holland? Would it be France? Which part of France? Everyone thought Calais because it was the shortest crossing point and it made sense. But all along, it was going to be Normandy. And the reason for that was quite simple. If you're going to assault somewhere from the sea and then sustain yourself on land to fight a major campaign, you need supplies. And for supplies, you need harbours. And you've got a huge one here at Cherbourg and an inland harbour there at Caen. The River Orne, which goes into Caen, and the Caen Canal, was navigable all the way. So you had two major ports. You also had all these lovely rivers conveniently placed like that, which created obstacles to the German armoured reserves, which were all sat over to the right there, somewhere near Calais. So when they realised that we'd landed somewhere else and they came running, we had all these rivers to fight behind. So that was one of the reasons they came. There were 5 landing beaches. Originally there were only going to be 3, but when Montgomery took over the operation at the start of 1944, he said, this needs to be bigger. If we're going to do it, let's do it properly. So he expanded it. So that entire beachhead that you can see from the top to the bottom was 40 miles long. The U stands for Utah Beach, an American landing beach. Below it, O for Omaha, another American beach. You'll find there's a theme with American code names. They like to give them a theme. Utah and Omaha, both place names. The drop zones for their paratroopers had American place names. In the modern world, they have operation names like Operation Iraqi Freedom. You can probably guess what that operation is all about. But then you come to the British beaches, and in typical eccentric British style, it's completely random. So you've got G for gold, Gold Beach, J for Juno, S for sword, completely random. Those were the 5 assault beaches. Juno, incidentally, I call it British, it was a Canadian landing beach that was given exclusively to Commonwealth troops to land on. We've got some numbers here as well. 21 represents the 21st Panzer Division, German. Now actually the 21st Panzer Division had been destroyed in its entirety in North Africa the year before, but they created a new one and started to reform it just down there near the city of Caen in Normandy. And it was just starting to build itself up and get its strength back together. Where you see the number 6, that represents British paratroopers. To prevent the flank of the invasion, the British 6th Airborne had to land between the River Orne and the River Deves, destroy the bridges on the River Deves to create an obstacle, and capture the bridges on the River Orne so we could get reinforcements across. The reason being, this stretch of land here is a massive patch of high ground, and if the Germans occupied that, they could dominate the rest of Normandy. So it was important that we landed to the east of that river and captured that high ground. And then up at the top there, you've got 82 and 101. 82 is the All-American, the 82nd Airborne, and 101, the 101st Screaming Eagles, both American parachute divisions. 101 designed to capture Carentan, so we could secure the crossings of the river there between the 2 American beaches, and the 82nd was there because at the rear of Utah Beach the Germans had flooded the ground and there were just some very narrow causeways from the beaches that needed to be secured, and that was the 82nd's job. Now you'll notice no one's landing in front of Cherbourg, and the reason for that is when they attacked Dieppe earlier in the war, they tried to attack the harbour head on, and that's why they got massacred, because they were looking at a 3-dimensional defensive position. They didn't know where they were getting shot at from, every direction, and so they decided that they would capture it from the inland flank, and that's why they landed on the bare coastline and then filtered out to capture these cities. So that was the plan, that was D-Day, that's what it was all about. It was scheduled for Monday the 5th of June, but the weather was just like we've had for the last 6 weeks. It was absolutely awful, and it's bad enough on a flat-bottomed landing craft trying to get off it and get on the beach anyway. When you've got the surf and the waves pushing you all over the place and tipping landing craft over, it's a non-starter. And they got a window, a gleam of opportunity. They had a large weather forecasting team with a chief Met officer from the Met Office, 4 o'clock every morning in the 2 weeks prior to the invasion, casting the runes. And on the morning of the 4th of June, he said, you can't do it tomorrow, the 5th is a non-starter. But you've got a window on the 6th, you can just do it. If you get moving, you can get the troops ashore. You might struggle to resupply them, but you can get the troops on the ground. If they didn't do it then, the moon and the tides would not be right for at least another month. And the war was dragging on, the Russians were under pressure on the Eastern Front, D-Day needed to happen, and so D-Day the 6th of June it was. Now interestingly, we're going to see a picture of this chap in a minute. Inside your programme there's a little extract from the book. I'll just read through it quickly, and it's from part 1. More scribbling. Grits hid a smile of satisfaction. Marx took a deep breath and looked up at the grey sky, screwing his face up against the incessant drizzle. The invasion can't be too far off, but the High Command think the Allies won't come just yet because of the weather. Grits pulled a face and shrugged. The weather never bothered the Ruskies, General, he commented. Marx regarded him with another owl-like stare. No, it didn't, did it? Another brief pause, and then, I think differently. What is it that I said at last week's conference? And this time Marx was looking at the divisional commander. Richter stirred and made a cautious answer. You said that you knew the way the English think. You said that they'd probably go to church one more time this Sunday and then come the next day. Today? Marx nodded. Yes, that's exactly what I said. One of the ADCs ventured a smile and interjected in a jovial tone. It's your birthday tomorrow, General. Thanks to the weather, it doesn't look as though the Allies will be spoiling your party after all. But Marx gave the young captain a sideways glance. Give them time, Hoffman. Give them time. General Marx, who we see a picture of shortly, was the German commander in Normandy. He was a very talented commander, very astute. He'd fought on the Russian front and had lost a leg Unlike the British Army, when you lost a leg, you didn't get a blighty wound. In the German Army, you just went somewhere not quite so active. So even though he only had one leg, he was sent to command the troops in Normandy. And actually, that's what happened to all German casualties. They had battalions called stomach battalions, where everybody who had internal digestive disorders were put in the same battalion, so they could all eat the same special food and have the same special latrines, which were probably not very pleasant to be around. He'd lost two of his sons in Russia. 2 of his sons were already dead, but he was a very old-fashioned Prussian general. He wasn't a Nazi, but he was very patriotic. He was in the Prussian mould, and he was dedicated to his profession. And everyone else in the high command was saying, Calais, that's where the Allies will come. And he said, no, Normandy, for the very reasons we've just spoken about. But no one believed him. And he also guessed at the timing. He guessed it exactly right. He said they'll go to church on Sunday and they'll come on Monday the 5th of June. And he told his core conference that the week before. All of his major commanders, he told them. And the only reason we didn't come is because of the weather. But we came the next day, General Marx's birthday. Bit of a downer, that. Unfortunately, General Marx was killed 6 days later commanding his troops in battle. He was killed by an Allied aircraft. So sadly, we never get to know his side of the story. But if you look into D-Day and all the problems that the German High Command had with conflicting orders, it would be really interesting to find out General Marx's take on the campaign. Sadly, he lost his life, but he was a good man. He was fighting for the wrong side, but he was a good man. I hope I've done justice to the people I've written about. Even though I've been a soldier myself, I've been shot at, people have fired things at me that go bang. I've had a modest amount of combat experience. I can only begin to imagine what it was like for these guys doing that all those years ago when they weren't volunteers, when they were pressed men and had no choice in the matter. Make no mistake, we are here today with all the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy because once upon a time real men did that for real on a damp day in June in 1944, unless we ever forget that. And that's a Canadian cemetery just outside Cruelly, south of Juno Beach. That's me. I hope it's been interesting for you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.